Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, October 4th. We begin tonight with a newly announced fund aimed at helping Atlantic Canada recover from the destruction of post-tropical storm Fiona. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the creation of a $300 million fund will help with Atlantic Canada's recovery. He says the money will go to the repair and reconstruction of critical infrastructure. Money will also go toward helping local communities and businesses replace and clean up fishing gear destroyed by Fiona. Well, with a landslide electoral victory, Quebec Premier François Legault is going to be choosing his new cabinet in the coming days. All polls report the CAQ won in 90 of Quebec's 125 ridings. The Liberals hung on to official opposition status, with the party winning in 21 ridings, which is down from the 27 it had before the campaign. One of the big questions of Mr. Legault's new mandate will be what happens if the federal Liberals change leaders, or if the Conservatives take power in the next federal election. Vigils are planned across the country today to honor missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Family members of Indigenous women killed across British Columbia shared their stories at a news conference yesterday. Josie August says family members resorted to handing out missing posters when her relative, Noelle O'Soup, went missing in May in Port Coquitlam. Advocates say police need to improve communication when they are investigating missing persons cases across different jurisdictions. Well, for the third report in a row, the participation report card is failing Canadian kids and youth. They've been given an overall grade of F when it comes to physical activity, screen time, and sleep recommendations. While acknowledging that COVID-19 containment measures kept kids indoors, the study found physical activity dropped and screen use soared during the pandemic. On its own, the report grades children with a D for physical activity. This is a drop from D+ in the 2020 report card. At the same time, kids logged more sedentary screen time, earning F in that category. This was billed as a significant decrease from the D+ in 2020. Canadians for Tax Fairness is calling out corporations for tax avoidance. The advocacy group says top companies paid $30 billion less in taxes last year than would be expected under existing corporate tax rates. The report analyzed the financial statements of 123 corporations, and it determined the actual tax rate paid by these companies was about 15% in 2021, which is lower than the 26.5% average of the combined federal and provincial tax rates. Back on the West Coast, the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver says September's home sales dropped by 46% since last year and 10% from August. Now, this comes as interest rate increases cooled buyer sentiment. Last month's sales were almost 36% below the 10-year September sales average. Andrew Liss is the board's director of economics and data analytics. He attributed the lower sales levels to the Bank of Canada hiking interest and mortgage rates in an effort to tamp down on inflation. Canadian auto sales fell year over year in September to the lowest sales level for that month since 2009. Desrosiers Automotive Consultants says vehicle sales were down 4.5% from last year, and this is due to persistent supply shortages. Sales varied from automaker to automaker based on supply chain disruptions, which includes the availability of semiconductors. The Detroit 3 saw a big rebound in sales in the third quarter, but others saw sales drop, including a 37% retreat in total sales for Honda Canada. Moving to Ontario, where lawyers representing transgender, Indigenous, and Black sex workers were in the Superior Court today. They are expected to argue that Canada's prostitution laws are too restrictive and disproportionately harm marginalized groups. The Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform says there shouldn't be any criminal laws that are specific to sex work. It says it has dozens of recommendations to create a more regulated industry. All right, well, back in BC, a university professor is working to find a way to help save kelp forests in the province for future generations. Liam Coleman is a postdoctoral fellow at Simon Fraser University. He and a team of researchers at the university have developed a cryogenic freezing technique to store seeds of the at-risk bull kelp in a biobank. Now, the biobank can keep the kelp seeds in perpetuity. This would allow farmers, community groups, and environmental organizations to access samples and reintroduce them to the oceans in the future. Forum Daily will be right back after the break, and when we return, we're going to be taking a look at more news stories and major headlines from across Canada and from around the world. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. A new audit of Canada's efforts to protect aquatic species at risk of going extinct is not so impressed with officials. It says the federal government is biased against protecting commercially valuable fish. Environment Commissioner Jerry DeMarco says Fisheries and Oceans Canada is slow to act, especially when a species is designated as in need of protection by a national committee. Mr. DeMarco's audit looked closely at 9 species of fish, 2 species of mussels, and 1 species of sea turtle that the committee assessed as needing protection. And in every case, Fisheries and Oceans decided against listing those with significant commercial value. This while those without commercial value got protection. On the West Coast, British Columbia says it will provide more supports to BC inmates that are struggling with mental health and substance use after they leave jail. Mental Health and Addictions Minister Sheila Malcolmson says inmates leaving a corrections facility will be supported by transition teams. Now, that support could involve services to help with housing, healthcare, transportation, and treatment. Ms. Malcolmson says communities will benefit from less crime by former inmates who are supported in navigating the services they need. CN is increasing its fleet and crew this winter to prepare for potential extreme cold temperatures. The rail company says it is changing its approach for the winter to deliver consistent service even during extreme weather. It comes after a year of unpredictable events, including flooding in British Columbia, caused significant delays across the country. The company says it anticipates an increase in rail traffic volumes this fall and winter. The province of Ontario is putting an additional $342 million toward energy efficiency programs. Now, this includes paying some customers to stop running their air conditioning on hot summer days. Energy Minister Todd Smith says the expansion of energy conservation initiatives are expected to be rolled out starting next spring. He says it will save enough electricity by 2025 to power about 130,000 homes a year. The government says over a lifespan of up to 20 years, these programs will result in the reduction of 3 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Switching gears to moves by the Dutch government, which has unveiled details of its energy price cap for households. It also revealed the outlines of a subsidy system aimed at easing the pain for small to medium-sized businesses that use a lot of power. The moves on Tuesday come amid soaring prices for gas and electricity. These have forced some businesses in the Netherlands to halt production. The price cap comes into force in January. Meanwhile, German energy giant RWE says it will phase out the burning of coal by 2030. The decision will accelerate the closure of some of Europe's coal plants. The phase-out is estimated to save around 280 million metric tons of climate-changing greenhouse gas emissions. The German government argues that its ramp-up on coal extraction in the meantime is necessary. This will be in order to ensure energy security amid the fallout of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. U.S. flight attendants are about to get an extra hour of required rest between shifts. The Federal Aviation Administration said Tuesday that it will require the workers to get at least 10 hours off between shifts. Now, this fulfills a requirement that Congress approved in 2018. Acting FAA Administrator Billy Nolan says the extra hour of rest will increase safety on planes. The largest flight attendants union has been fighting for years to get more rest. A Russian court has fined social media platform TikTok for failing to delete LGBTQ+ material. Now, this is the latest move in the country's crackdown on big tech companies. The court in Moscow issued the $50,000 penalty to the short video sharing platform following a complaint by Russian regulators. The Russian government has been stepping up efforts to enforce greater control over the internet and social media. All right, well, meanwhile, a city in southeastern Finland has removed the country's last publicly displayed statue of Russian revolutionary leader Vladimir Lenin. Residents of Katka had pressured local authorities to get rid of the statue, which comes in the wake of Russia's war in Ukraine. It was moved to a local museum, and the museum's director says the bronze bust was made by an Estonian sculptor on Moscow's orders and presented to Katka in 1979. An Italian astronaut and the head of the International Space Station has brought a Barbie doll modeled after her into space. Commander Samantha Cristoforetti says she wants to inspire girls to grow up and become astronauts and physicists. Ahead of the International Day of the Girl, she answered questions from space posted by girls from around the world. All right, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to be taking a look at the Pacific Island countries and a big diplomatic push by the U.S. We'll be joined by Miss Cleo Paskal, Indo-Pacific expert and journalist. She's going to be unpacking the situation in the Pacific. Stay with us. The foreign minister of Solomon Islands says his nation has agreed to sign a historic accord only after indirect references to China were removed. The 11-point declaration between the United States and over a dozen other Pacific nations covers issues including strengthening ties, climate change, and bolstering Pacific regionalism. The remarks by Solomon Islands represent the first time it has publicly acknowledged its initial concerns about the agreement and expressed why it had a change of heart. The accord was signed in Washington last week after a major diplomatic push by the United States to the Pacific Island countries. All of this comes as China continues to expand its own presence in the region. Well, joining us now is Miss Cleo Paskal, journalist and non-resident senior fellow for the Indo-Pacific at the FDD. Ma'am, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be here.
So what are some of the key points that stand out to you in this 11-point declaration?
It's not binding. It's quite general. It has, as you mentioned, no reference to not just the elephant, but the pachyderm in the room, which is China. And the U.S. let itself be manipulated by China via proxy Solomon Islands into toning it down in order to be able to say, look, we got a deal. But it's not binding. It's not really anything. So we'll see what happens in actual implementation. There were other things that were announced that are much more promising, but the deal itself is show, but not necessarily anything that will change lives on the ground.
Some very interesting points you make there, ma'am. Now, why has the U.S. made the Pacific Island countries such a major priority now, considering it has a willingness to invest over $860 million in this partnership?
Right. So in terms of the money, also just I'll explain why it's important, but it's also key to understand, just like we understand a bit more about why the deal isn't really a deal, the money isn't really money. 600 million of that still has to be appropriated by Congress for a tuna treaty, which is money that the U.S. owned anyways. A lot of the rest of it is going towards other pre-existing projects and will have to be appropriated by Congress. And much of it had already been announced several months ago. So I'm not trying to downplay the interest and the intention to engage more. It's just the spin around it isn't helpful if you're trying to understand what the actual security risks are that are triggering this engagement. And they are really China, in order to break out of the first island chain and to take Taiwan, needs to have control, if not influence, in the Pacific Islands. And it has been very effective at political warfare throughout the region for the last 15 to 20 years, to the point where it has signed an actual security deal with the Solomon Islands that will allow it to deploy Chinese troops to defend Chinese citizens and Chinese businesses in the Solomon Islands if the government of the Solomons, which is basically one pro-PRC guy, as we've now seen, the prime minister, allows it to. So the situation is strategically incredibly complex but important. This is China trying to create a situation where the U.S. is pushed back to Hawaii where the security perimeter of the US is pushed back to Hawaii, and they can only do that if they've got control or influence in the Pacific Islands. And they've been, as mentioned, extremely successful at doing that.
Now, given that Canada is a member of the Five Eyes and a Pacific country as well, what do we know so far about Ottawa's engagement in this issue?
So one of the initiatives that's a relatively new initiative is the Partners in the Blue Pacific, which is a series of mostly Western countries that are supposed to coordinate their engagement in the region. So it's led by the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, Japan, UK, Germany, and Canada was announced as joining over the last couple of weeks. This is a kind of donor consortium. It doesn't. The question is how it will engage with the region. It seems to be going to engage through this multinational organization called the Pacific Island Forum, which has been problematic in the past and has a lot of Australian and New Zealand influence in its direction. And if Australia and New Zealand's guidance had been helpful, because they were the prime Five Eyes partners in the region for over 15 years, we really wouldn't be in the situation we are in now. So what we seem to be doing as a country is reinforcing the pre-existing structures and guidances, which haven't been particularly successful. So it would have been nice to see some kind of Canadian innovations for engaging in the region, maybe through bilingualism, bringing in the French Pacific as well as the English Pacific, looking at some things that are uniquely Canadian that we can bring to the area, maybe First Nations contributions to traditional land management, that sort of thing. But instead, we seem to be kind of tagging along to this pre-existing way of engaging with the region.
It's clear a lot still needs to be done. Ms. Paskal, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Pleasure, thanks.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to be taking a look at the major headlines and news stories from around the world. So stay tuned. We'll return shortly. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has formally ruled out any and all talks with Russia following its illegal annexation of Ukrainian territories. Mr. Zelensky declared that holding negotiations with Vladimir Putin has become impossible after his decision to annex 4 regions of Ukraine. Russia's upper house of parliament ratified the annexation treaties today. This makes the captured regions of Ukraine part of Russia. The Kremlin responded to Mr. Zelensky by saying it will wait for Ukraine to sit down for talks on ending the conflict. Meanwhile, the Swedish prosecutor in charge of the investigation into leaks from pipelines in the Baltic Sea says he has ordered the area to be closed. This comes as he carries out a preliminary investigation into suspected sabotage. Undersea blasts last week involving several hundred pounds of explosives damaged the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines in 4 locations. The damage to the Russian-owned pipelines led to huge methane leaks in international waters in the Baltic Sea. North Korea continues to ramp up its missile tests, with Japan being the latest country in range. The country launched what is believed to be an intermediate-range ballistic missile over northern Japan for the first time in 5 years. The launch of the nuclear-capable weapon prompted Japan to issue evacuation notices and suspend trains. It is the most provocative weapons demonstration by North Korea this year. The North is ramping up its missile tests in its push to build a full-fledged nuclear arsenal that threatens the U.S. and its allies. All right, well, meanwhile, within the U.S., hundreds of thousands of Florida residents are faced with another day without electricity. This comes nearly a week after Hurricane Ian ripped through the state. Rescuers continue to search for people trapped inside homes, fighting past lingering floodwaters and debris. Officials say that as of yesterday, more than 1,900 people have been rescued. At least 78 people have been confirmed dead, 71 in Florida, 4 in North Carolina, and 3 in Cuba. All right, well, in Uganda, opposition figure Bobby Wine says that a planned pipeline to export oil is likely to entrench the long rule of President Yoweri Museveni. In an interview with the Associated Press, Mr. Wine voiced his opposition to the project, which has become increasingly controversial over environmental concerns. Mr. Wine is a singer and former lawmaker who ran for president in 2021. He is the most prominent Ugandan to object to the East African crude oil pipeline, which has run into headwinds as activists pile on pressure on France's Total Energies and its Chinese partner to pull out. Moving to Germany now, where the foreign minister has told her Polish counterpart that there will be no more reparations for the Second World War. Now, this is because Berlin considers the matter to be closed. Yesterday, Poland signed and expedited a note to Germany demanding some $1.3 trillion in reparations. Now, this was for material and other damages and losses that Poland claims were caused by Nazi Germany's wartime occupation. Berlin says that while Germany recognizes its historical responsibility, the matter is closed. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is doing away with notices about the COVID-19 risk of visiting specific countries. It says it is making the move because fewer countries are testing for the virus or reporting the number of COVID-19 cases, which makes it harder to judge the risk facing travelers. The agency will only post a notice for an individual country if a situation, such as a troubling new variant of the virus, changes travel recommendations for that country. Well, the city of Paris has decided against broadcasting World Cup matches on giant screens in public fan zones. The move reflects concerns over rights violations of migrant workers and the environmental impact of the tournament in Qatar. It comes despite the city's football club, Paris Saint-Germain, being owned by Qatar Sports Investments. The Nobel Prize for Physics was awarded to Alan Aspect, John F. Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger for work in quantum mechanics. The week of announcements kicked off yesterday. The 2022 Nobel Peace Prize will be announced on Friday, and the Economics Award on October 10th. An over 2,000-pound pumpkin grown in western New York has set a new U.S. record for the heaviest such gourd. The big pumpkin was weighed in at the Great Pumpkin Farm in the Buffalo suburb of Clarence, New York. The Buffalo News reports Scott Andrews' entry in the contest broke the previous national mark. The prize-winning pumpkin will be on display at the Great Pumpkin Farm Fall Festival through October 16th. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.